Hello lovelies, today we're going to be taking a look at the Elite Dangerous tabletop role-playing game by previously unknown company, Spidermind Games, who I know next to nothing about. It was also distributed by Modiphius, though I'm not sure whether it still is or not. It doesn't use 2D20, which is Modiphius's in-house system. So, yeah, I don't know. A lot of small companies seem to have sprung up to do licenses, whereas in the past it used to be that existing games companies would pick up a bunch of licenses and do stuff with them, and then crash and burn horribly. I'm not sure which way is better. I believe this was kickstarted. There's a big group of fans of Elite Dangerous and of the Elite series going way back, so it seems like a pretty safe bet. So let's get into it. It is a fairly simple D10 based system. You roll your dice, you add your bonuses, you beat a target number. A 1 is a automatic failure, a 10 is an automatic success. That strikes me as a little bit too common. That's twice as common that you'll get a botch or a critical than in basic Dungeons and Dragons, which makes it all very swings and roundabouts in a lot of ways. I think a way you might be able to deal with that would be to adopt the Cyberpunk RPG rules where the 10s explode and add on, and we always house ruled if you rolled a 1, you took away, to give you a chance of getting lower, a chance of getting higher, but your skill still having something to do with it. Or maybe out of combat you could, or critical situations, you could have roll 2d10, take the highest for your roll, but no crits or botches. Meh. I don't know. That leapt out at me from the system as something peculiar. Everything kind of comes off of that basic roll. So yeah, it's simple. If I were to sum it up in 2 words, I would describe Elite Dangerous as Traveller Light, because it has a lot of the same appeal. It has a lot of the same sort of mechanics, random generation of star systems and so on. It has a broadly similar career system, though you can pick several careers and you don't have a chance of dying during character creation. It's not so much a mini game as just a buffet from which you can pick various things. It's also a little bit more pulpy and action oriented than Traveller is, because you get special capabilities as well as career skills and so on, and you also get special sort of karma knacks, tricks that you can do a certain amount of times during play, and characters are a bit more robust and survivable than they are in Traveller. So what's the setting? Well, the setting is that of Elite, a sprawling universe populated almost entirely by humans. The only alien races are the Thargons or Thargoids, and they're mysterious and unknowable and very alien. So the main conflicts are between the 3 human factions. You've got a Federation-ish style group, though a bit more mercantile. You've got a traditionalist, monarchical type group, the Imperials, and then you have a loose alliance of fringe worlds. So that gives you the scope to replicate most sort of science fiction tropes that you might want, apart from aliens, but there's nothing to stop you adding aliens in. Compared to Traveller, there is a lot more focus on the individual character, the individual pilot, the individual one-person spaceship. So if you're playing with a group, it assumes that you're all going to want to play pilots and you're all going to want your own independent spaceships. So that's an interesting difference in focus from Traveller. It does give you a degree of additional independence for your characters, and allows for sort of squadron play, which is something a bit different, but it's lacking a bit in how to take a more Traveller-esque way of doing things, clubbing together to buy a larger ship and filling out a crew for the whole ship and the things that they do. It's easy to overcome, but a bit more effort could have been put into that style of play, considering. Interpersonal combat, so you have endurance, which is basically hit points. Most basic hand weapons do a d10, perhaps plus something. So on average rolls, you're going to be taking 3, 4, 5 hits from a weapon before you go down. That seems a little light to me. It might be okay for the player characters, but going up against other enemies, when you shoot someone, you expect them to go down. So it might be an idea to double the damage from some of these weapons, or to increase the impact that burst fire has, that sort of thing, or to halve the hit points that enemies have, because they're not characters. So why should they be as tough or as capable, unless they're big baddies? And that would fit more with this kind of slightly more pulpy, action movie oriented style of play that you have here. It's not exactly a level based system, but it does have the ranks from elite, from mostly harmless to dangerous. As you go up in rank, your skill level maximums increase. Starting character has a 40 maximum, and it goes up a bit each time. And your endurance goes up a bit each time. Experience. So you hit kind of breakpoints for the levels, that tells you when you go up in rank, and you increase your skills in a way similar-ish to Call of Cthulhu, which seems to be a popular game to crib from for skill systems these days. Anytime you roll a skill, you get to put a tick next to it, and at the end of the session or the adventure, that skill goes up by 1. Now, skills are on percentages, but typically you're only rolling a d10 and adding the first digit. So if you had a skill of 67, you rolled a 3, you'd add 6. So that would give you a total of 9, for example. In combat, weapons come with a difficulty, which is then modified by the defense score that the defender has, and that's what you need to beat on your roll. So dodging and so forth tend to be a bit more passive than otherwise. If you choose to parry and someone misses you, so your parry wasn't really needed necessarily, you can do a counterattack straight away. So that makes melee combat a little bit more back and forth, a little bit more interesting in some ways. Now, Elite has always been focused on the ships. It has only recently been that it has expanded into vehicles and a little bit more kind of interpersonal gameplay. But, an RPG doesn't have the development time, it doesn't need all the graphical resources and everything, and the different styles of play to be programmed out. So this will scratch that itch from Elite, where you want to get out of your ship and explore, or get up to shenanigans on bases and so forth. So I think it does round out the Elite world, and the book is also a useful resource and reference point for a basic overview of everything in the world of Elite. Though, of course, obviously, you can find wikis online now. The system being so simple and robust makes it a prime useful system, I think, for adaptation of other science fiction properties. You could quite easily turn this into an Expanse game, or what's that big MMO? EVE Online. You could quite easily convert this to EVE Online, though EVE has much more emphasis on very large vessels, which this doesn't. It's much more the kind of fighter sort of scale. I do have some of the supplementary material coming, which hopefully expands out some of the ships and the different styles of play that you can get involved in. There is a nice comprehensive list of ships. There aren't actually that many different ship types, but each type has lots of different subtypes fitted out and kitted for different sort of ways, and the customization rules are quite robust because everything's fairly common, and because everything is fairly modular. It's quite easy to customize your ships in the ways that you might want to. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. The flip side to all of that, of course, is that it's quite difficult to truly individuate your ships, and there isn't as robust a kind of ship design system per se. But a skilled games master can look at the material in here, look at the game statistics from the computer game, and come up with ideas fairly easily. And while AI art may have its failings, creating spaceships and space vistas and things is it's fairly forgiving, so you can do that okay. So I say it's lighter than Traveller, but there are a lot of options nonetheless. It's a bit easier to do and to handle. I've often felt that a modular system is a better way of doing things. We have vehicles, which are a new thing in the computer game. Not too many options, but they're kind of generic, so they're easy enough for you to customize or to describe differently. You know, that secret weapon in the GM's toolkit of reskinning things works very well with these. You've got all your basics, it's not too difficult. Sorry, these new pills are really screwing with me in lots of ways, but they are making me better. So, yeah, the GM advice is okay, fairly generic. Some specifics, which is useful to space games as a whole and Elite in particular. And a decent rogues gallery. Most of the enemies you're going to be coming up against are people and standard spaceships, so it doesn't need to be too in-depth. I did feel that, as with Traveller, as with a lot of games with a sort of wide space and many potential ecosystems and alien worlds and so on, it's never made sense to me that these games have done specific alien species. Rather, you should have a robust or genericized sort of way of creating alien species quickly on the fly. I always thought. Excuse me. I've tried other takes. I can't stop coughing. I'm sorry. So yeah, this didn't make a huge amount of sense to me. It's never made a huge amount of sense to me to do specific creatures unless you're talking about specific worlds. We have vehicles, drones. Yeah, in a lot of ways, the game feels like Cyberpunk, but maybe a couple of 100 years into the future, but with a lot more settlement and expansive humanity in it. There are random tables for rewards, for star systems for missions. If you're one of those weird solo play people, you could probably do a fairly successful solo RPG campaign using this and your favourite GM simulator. And you could probably get something fairly decent and robust out of that. Or one-on-one gaming is also very much a valid possibility, especially since as part of the backgrounds of your character, you can have a partner in crime, like a secondary character that comes around with you, which can compensate a bit for being off on your Todd. There's no index, which is a bit of a problem because some things are hard to find. The contents is fairly good though, and the sections are somewhat color-coded, so you can find them. In terms of design, a lot seems to be obviously renders or concept art, and then occasionally you get some art that is different and somewhat glaring. I think some of it comes from the card game or board game that the same company does as well. The black and white art just feels out of place, a lot of it. It looks like the cheesier end of 1980s British comics art, which is fine, but it does feel a bit out of place, and many of the illustrations feel a little bit too small to be bothered with. You can't make them out. The colour of the print isn't bad, so that's not something I'm going to complain about for once, possibly because some of this stuff was designed to be shown on computer monitors and they went for high contrast sort of material anyway, so it looks better than a lot of modern RPG books in a lot of ways. In terms of style then, it's an interesting system. It's simple, quick, customizable, and it's presented largely well. Actually, the cover is probably the worst art in the book, unfortunately. It's presented well. There's a few weird choices. As a reference book, it's not the most useful, but it does have a ribbon, which I always like. Style, then, I would say a high 3. In terms of substance, and there's a lot here. It's everything you'd want in a core book for an Elite game. It's just not necessarily arranged or referenced in the best possible way. And you really want it to go beyond the game. And in some aspects, it lets you down a bit. So, still a high 4 for substance. So that's 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5, but a high 3.5, closer to a 4 out of 5. If you're a fan of Elite, and if you're not getting that itch scratched by Traveller or some other similar game, though it wouldn't be too difficult to convert this back and forth with Traveller. 1 to 10 isn't that different from 2 to 12. As a range of stats anyway. So there you go. I quite like it. I think I'll actually play it at some point. So, high praise indeed. Zang. Go back to where it all started for Postmortem Studios in 2004. Cloak of Steel, remade in French as Mantel d'Acier, created back when Postmortem Studios was trying to be a workers' cooperative. A magipunk fantasy setting of fortress cities and magical mecha. An OGL game with flexible magic and a well-developed world. One day, it'll get a new edition. Until then, you can get it at post-mort.com, drive-thru RPG, and lulu.com.